pleasure, we welcome you all for the second session of the webinar on ophthalmic imaging conducted by Aravind Eye Hospitals, Tirunelveli. The goal of this webinar is to explain the basis of most commonly used corneal imaging techniques, including the overview of how they work and how each modality is used in clinical practice from the experienced team of corneal surgeons. We have 4 eminent speakers for this session. Participants, kindly post your queries in the chat box. We would take up unanswered queries at the end of the whole session. We have 30 minutes for discussion. Kindly mute the audio during the talk, requesting all the speakers not to disconnect in between and to stick on to the time allotted. For the first talk, we welcome Dr. Anita Raghavan, Senior Consultant in Cornea Refractive Surgery, as well as Medical Director of the Eye Bank at Aravind Coimbatore. Consequent to her diplomate from SN Chennai, Dr. Anita had completed her anterior segment fellowship from Harvard Hospitals. She has over 20 years of experience in cornea, external diseases, and refractive surgery, and has published over 35 articles in the index journals. We once again welcome Dr. Anita ma'am for her talk on confocal microscopy.
Thank you, Anita. Good morning, everyone. My topic is on confocal microscopy. The vast majority of tissue examination is done with light microscopy. But there are certain issues with that. One is decreased resolution. Two is that while you examine the plane, which is called a focal plane, you have interference of light, which is reflected from structures above and below the plane of examination, what you refer to as out of focus blur. The specimen therefore has to be very thin for you to see properly with a light microscopy. Apart from that, since it's a dead tissue and processed tissue, you have all the attendant artifacts. Coming to confocal microscopy, fundamentally you have two relevant areas. One is the detector and then the tissue sample that you're seeing. In between the two, you have a pinhole so that you have only a single point of tissue is illuminated by a point source of light. Now this is the light comes in. You get a single point of light and simultaneously you image it by a camera in the same plane. So therefore you have what is called as a confocal. So fundamentally you have a sharply focused optical slice through the sample. You get very high resolution but absolutely no field of view because you only have a single point of illumination detection. To overcome this, you simultaneously illuminate and image tissue with thousands of tiny spots of light. So you get a series of optical slices with different focus lengths, and then you have a 3D reconstruction of this. The dark field microscopy is very relevant, or the principles of dark field microscopy is very relevant to confocal microscopy. Basically, the light that passes from the illuminated tissue only passes to the camera, and any light that is reflected from transparent tissue is blocked. So what you see here is that this is the area of illumination. All the transparent tissue, the light is blocked, and so therefore you get a background that is dark. Whatever scatters light, you get very high contrast is therefore achieved. But you see so much, but finally the challenge that you have is morphology. How do you identify what you see? There are different types of confocal microscopy. You have tandem scanning and laser scanning. In the tandem, basically what happens is that you have a broad beam of light, which is split into tiny points of illumination. It passes through a beam splitter and then objective lens, and then you focus on a point focus. The returning light comes back, it comes through a mirror, goes through a conjugate point, and then goes back into the camera. Now this NIPCO disc is continuously rotated so you get images of the entire cornea. The scanning slit confocal microscopy also has the same principles. You can vary the height, the width, the thickness of the optical substance as well as the amount of light. But basically what we use today is the Heidelberg retinal tomogram, which has been modified by the addition of the Rostock corneal module. So this is interposed in front of the original machine. In front of this you have a tonocap, which is basically a contact lens, and then you have a coupling gel. Now the distance from the cornea to the microscope is kept stable at all times because of this contact lens. And so therefore you have serially produced images of very thin slices of the cornea, and the depth of focus is around 5 to 7 microns. Based upon the internal field length that you use, you either have the field of view will either be 300 microns or 400 into 400 microns. The lateral resolution is around 1 microns, and this can even go up to 5 micron levels if you have very good contrast. The axial resolution is 4 microns and the cellular magnification is 800 times. Now, this is a put together cross-sectional representation of the normal cornea. So basically what you can look for and see is the epithelium, the Bowman's layer, the anterior and the posterior stroma, the decimus and the endothelium. A closer view, what you basically focus on is the wing cells of the epithelium, the basal epithelial cells, the submasal plexus, which has a linear pattern, the anterior stroma where the keratocytes are more, the posterior stroma, and then finally the endothelium. The confocal microscopy is useful at two levels. One, evaluation of normal state as well as the pathological state. You can study the conjunctiva, the cornea, tarsal plate, the film, and the limbus. The confocal microscopy has been used in varying situations. Some of these are infectious keratitis, corneal innervation, tumors, dystrophies and degeneration, the dry eye, and limbal stem cell deficiency. What we are going to talk on today is basically upon infectious keratitis. Now, there are some changes that are common in all forms of infectious keratitis. One will be a decrease in innervation. You have an increase in dendritic cells. You also have a huge influx of inflammatory cells. You also have scarring and edema. Now, let's take a look at what are all the kinds of infectious keratitis that you can study using the confocal. You can obtain relevant information in acanthamoeba, fungal keratitis, microsporidial keratitis, Candida piccius, HSV keratitis, and CMV endotheliitis. In acanthamoeba keratitis, you can study both the cyst form as well as the trophozoite form. This is because the trophozoite keeps putting out characteristic projections called the acanthopodia, which can be seen on a confocal. And the other thing is the double wall, which is characteristic of the acanthamoeba cyst. However, there are some issues with the confocal. Now, when you take a look at the acanthamoeba cyst, it's hyperreflective, it is stellate or rounded, and it is surrounded by a wavy exocyst which is hyperreflective. Unfortunately, there are wide variations in size and reflectivity, and the basic cyst size is around 15 to 28 microns. Now, if you have clusters, as you see here, or you have a linear arrangement, they are more easily identified, and it also indicates greater pathogenicity. Inflammatory cells as well as the early stage of the acanthamoeba are difficult to differentiate because both are round. So what do you do in such situations? So what you can do is that magnify, blow it up a little bit, then you can see the cyst wall a little better. To move away from the area of the inflammatory cells, as the inflammatory cells keep receding, you can see the acanthamoeba cyst a little bit better. One more thing that you can do is to focus at the edge of the lesion. That is where the disease activity is more, and so there you can see the acanthamoeba cyst usually in clusters or in chains. The trophozoite stage can also be identified, but this is very difficult because it constantly changes shape. One of the advantages is that it's larger, around 11 to 45 microns. One thing that you can do is once you think that you see a trophozoite, you can repeat the scan, say 10 minutes later, and then see the trophozoite has changed shape. If that particular thing that you identified owns its shape, then it's likely that you're seeing a trophozoite. These are probable trophozoites. We're not very sure about it, but it is found adjacent to the acanthamoeba cyst. Coming to microsporidiosis, this is another area where the confocal can prove helpful. This is a protozoan intracellular parasite, as you all know. The epithelial form can be diagnosed very easily. You can easily access the material and you have the characteristic SPK. But when you come to the stromal form, sometimes it's very difficult. It mimics fungal keratitis. The other thing is that it cannot be cultured. So either on smears by confocals or only HP will be diagnostic. On the smear, what you basically see is that it looks a lot like gram-positive organisms, and the spores are either scattered all around the cells or it will be clustered within the cytoplasm of the epithelial cells. This clustering is the one that we basically make use of in the confocal. In the HP, again, they appear as blue or violet organisms. On the confocal, if you take a look, here are the cells, and you can see tiny multiple intracellular hyperreflective dot. These can be seen either in the corneal epithelial cell or you can see it in the stromal keratocyte. This is a magnified view of the same with some more of the structures. Coming to fungal keratitis, the hyphae are basically seen as hyperreflective structures and their branching pattern is usually characteristic. Now, the dichotomous branching that you see was originally considered characteristic of Aspergillus, but as you see in this study by Chidambaram, you can see that the fusarium angle is around 59, whereas the aspergillus angle is around 63. So basically, practically, it does not make much of sense to differentiate fusarium from aspergillus on the confocal. Take a look at this. Can you identify which are acanthamoeba and which are fusarium? The top row is all aspergillus, the bottom row is all fusarium. But take a look at this. This is almost 90 degrees angle, and this was an aspergillus positive. The other issue that you can have is when you're dealing with a solitary hyphae and a stromal trunk. So this is a branching stromal trunk, and it usually dichotomous. The branching is at 90 degrees. Look at this. Is this a hyphae or is it not a hyphae? What about these structures? Some of them are linear. Could it be a subbasal plexus, or are they small bits of the hyphae? Now this was aspergillus positive. So we presume that all this is hyphae. One thing that can help you is to take a look at the basic pattern by which the corneal innervation occurs. The stromal trunk enters at a mean depth of around 300 to 100 microns. It comes and then it forms a subbasal plexus. Once it forms a subbasal plexus, all the fibers will be linear. So if you see linear fibers, if you see linear fibers, you can presume that it could be the nerve. 2 will be the orientation of the hyphae. The hyphae can come in from any direction and they will not be parallel. Coming to stromal keratocytes, this is much more common in older subjects. And when you have an infectious process, the keratocytes become highly reflective and they can elongate into linear forms and then finally evolve into a needle-like structure. There is always a problem in identifying these. One is that you can mistake them for the pseudo hyphae of Candida, or they can also be mistaken for hyphal fragments. This can become an issue. These are basically activated keratocytes. These are much easier to see. Now these could be hyphal fragments, or they are elongating and forming apoptotic fragments. Once again here, is this a fragment or is it a needle-like fragment because of the apoptosis? Hyphae and scar tissue are also difficult to see, but if you look very carefully, you can see the dichotomous branching in the center of the scar. Coming to Pythium keratitis, this is again a difficult situation because a lot of them are mistaken for fungal keratitis, and as you all know, early intervention is very important in identifying and treating this condition by means of a therapeutic keratoplasty. However, we mistake it for fungal keratitis because of the mycelial growth of the culture plate. The confocal is useful in identifying Pythium. Most of them will have a beaded structure and the branching angle tends to be a little bit wider. One of the things that we have observed with Pythium keratitis is that even when the lesion is very superficial, sometimes it takes multiple scrapings to get a smear positive or a culture positive. The confocal microscopy can also be combined with cultures in certain situations with better relevance. For example, in deep keratitis, in polymicrobial keratitis, and also in smear and culture negative cases. Now, this is a patient who is clinically diagnosed to have a fungal keratitis. And when you see on the confocal, you can see plenty of hyphae. But when we look closer, the resolution is very poor and the cultures were positive only for aspergillus. But we also had a situation where we thought that we saw an acanthamoeba cyst. So we repeated the scraping 20 days later and then it is positive for both aspergillus as well as acanthamoeba. The stromal edema can blur the images a great deal. So if you're not sure, it's better to go in for a repeat scraping. Once again, this is a contact lens wearer with a 2-day history, and we thought he'd look like a viral keratitis. The smears and the cultures were negative, but on the confocal, you find both cysts as well as hyphae. Coming to this case, a patient has been treated elsewhere for 2 months, has a grayish-white infiltrate, which is almost full thickness, a small patchy infiltrate. 1 second, please. Difficult to talk so loudly. And no, I'm not corona positive. Smears are positive elsewhere for acanthamoeba and treated as acanthamoeba for 2 months, but with no improvement. So we did 2 to 3 sets of scrapings, and the second scraping, a few hyphae were seen, and the third scraping was NNA positive. In the meantime, while we did the confocal, we find that it's teeming with hyphae. So given the presence of both an acanthamoeba as well as a fungus, decided to do a therapeutic keratoplasty, and there the button is positive for Aspergillus niger. This is another patient, basically looks like a classical acanthamoeba, but Pseudomonas grew in the beginning. So naturally, we did a confocal immediately, and until the cultures became positive for acanthamoeba. But when you look at the confocal, you find that plenty of cysts are there. So this was a patient who had both a bacterial infection as well as an acanthamoeba. Coming to this, we thought either it's an acanthamoeba or there is a fungal keratitis, but the culture was positive for both acanthamoeba as well as for a gram-negative bacteria. On confocal, you see some amount of hyphae too, apart from the cysts. Once again, the diagnosis was fungal keratitis. You can see the cysts on the scraping, both acanthamoeba and Fusarium grew. In this patient, we were not able to see any hypostagmus because of the stromal edema. This patient, classically a fungal keratitis, but it grew both Fusarium and acanthamoeba. But on the confocal, we were not able to see any cysts, only hyphae were seen. Coming to HSV keratitis, basically what you see is that you have a decrease in the superficial nerve plexus. Both the count, the length, and the branching pattern are altered. Candida, the pseudohyphae, they look a lot like the semi-keratocytes undergoing apoptosis. And finally, for CMV endotheliitis, you have the owlite cells which are characteristic and which you can use for identifying CMV infections, both of the cornea as well as post-transplantation. So confocal microscopy can be considered in the setting of infectious keratitis when the clinical picture is not clear, in the presence of ring infiltrates, in chronic undiagnosed cases, in cases that are unresponsive to therapy, and also in smear and culture negative cases. Thank you.
Stop share.
Thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful and informative talk. Over to the next speaker. She hardly needs any introduction. She is an idol of knowledge, experience, and inspiration to all of us. Dr. M. Vanati, Professor, Cornea, Ocular Surface, Cataract and Refractive Services from AIIMS, New Delhi. She has a vast experience in cornea and high-volume surgeon in pediatric keratoplasty and advanced lamellar procedures. She has published over 90 indexed international publications and has authored many postgraduate ophthalmic textbooks. We welcome you, ma'am, for the talk on the role of anterior segment OCT in cornea and refractive surgery. Ma'am,
hear me? Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am, we are able to hear you.
Yeah, okay. So I will delve right away onto the topic. Thank you for having me here in your wonderful webinar. So I will limit the next 10 minutes or so to the clinical applications of anterior segment
Share your screen, ma'am. Kindly share your screen, ma'am.
Can you see it now?
Yes, ma'am, we are able to see.
So we'll move on to the clinical applications of anterior segment OCT in cornea and refractive surgery practice. This is not an exhaustive list, but I'll try to cover as much as possible in the next 12 minutes or so. Historically, anterior segment OCT was first developed in 1994. It is a non-invasive, non-contact modality of imaging the cornea, conjunctiva, ocular surface, anterior chamber, the angle, the iris, and the lens. It's based on the Michelson's interferometry. And, it has two types, which we commonly know as the time domain and the Fourier domain. Just before I move on to the time domain and the Fourier domain, what most residents or postgraduates would like to know is how anterior segment OCT differs from that of a UBM or ultrabiomicroscopic examination. ASOCT is non-contact, where UBM is contact and needs an immersion method. The technology is optical in ASOCT, where UBM uses ultrasound. The resolution is around 15 microns, where the resolution is much higher in a UBM, is 50 microns here. You get longest scan dimensions here, which are 16 into 6, and in UBM, the scan dimensions are only 5 into 5, though you have more advanced versions available now here. The ASOCT is good for visualizing the cornea, the tear film, and the conjunctiva. The UBM is good for visualizing the sclera, the episclera, the angle, the ciliary body, and the lens. So that's a short introduction in showing, learning or understanding which is preferred in imaging, which structure of the ocular coats here. So coming back to the types of anterior segment OCT, you have the time domain and the Fourier domain. So the time domain is a little slower and has the imaging is not as clear and sharp, but the Fourier domain is much sharper and gives you faster imaging here. The Fourier domain now has moved on, moved on into what is known as the spectral domain here. And this is further innovated or has seen technological advances as the swept source OCT here. The wavelengths which are used are 1310 nanometers and 830 nanometers. The typical or the committed anterior segment OCT devices use the longer wavelength, that is 1310. And those devices which have enabled retinal functions use the shorter wavelengths, the near infrared 830 nanometers for the imaging purpose. So what's the Michelson's interferometer principle? Here it creates a reference beam of infrared light against which it measures multiple other beams of light, which return from when they are reflected from the tissue layers which are being imaged. And these reflected lights are connected from the sample of reference beams and they form an interference pattern. Multiple interference patterns are created over the surface of the structure that is being imaged, and A-scans are then generated. These A-scans are then combined into composite cross-sectional image or a B-scan, and that's how you get your cross-sectional image on an anterior segment OCT. So most of us know that on an anterior segment OCT scan of the cornea, this is what you would generally see. You would see the cornea, the corneal epithelium, the stroma, the endothelium, the angle structures, the iris, the thickness of the iris, and the lens. So I would leave out the glaucoma imaging, which would probably subsequently covered here, and move on to the clinical applications of ASOCT imaging in cornea and refractive practice. So what are the clinical applications? Has wide applications in corneal practice, in ocular surface practice, refractive surgical procedures, for imaging anterior segment tumors, for intraoperative imaging, which is another new dimension of anterior segment OCT, but I will probably not include this due to lack of time here, and postoperative monitoring here. So ASOCT now comes as a slit lamp mounted device, comes as a handheld device, and is also integrated into your operating microscopes here. In cornea practice, you have the various clinical indications commonly include corneal ectasias, hydrops, looking at corneal scars, dense corneal scars, corneoiridic scars, especially in pediatric age group and especially when you're doing under general anesthesia. Corneal dystrophies, when you want to look at the layers of various dystrophies, various deficits on the cornea, and has a significant role in corneal surgery, preoperative and postoperative monitoring. In refractive surgeries, you could look at its applications in phakic IOL when looking at the anterior chamber depth calculation and the ICL walls. In intact placements, in LASIX, it is restricted to looking at the interface concerns here. And of course, post-LASIK keratitis, where confocal is perhaps a better modality of imaging here. In surface ablations and of course in SMILE, it has got huge implications in diagnostic value. In ocular surface, you can image the tear meniscus. You can look at the conjunctivalized epithelium on the limbus and the corneal surface using the ASOCT, and has very good applications in anterior segment ocular surface squamous neoplasias here. So I'll just run you through a lot of clinical pictures so that you're aware of how these look like. And the most important or the most basic thing for which an ASOCT is commonly applied is the pachymetry estimations here. So you would like to know the thinnest pachymetry area in a keratoconus or in a pellucid marginal degeneration or any other ectasias you're looking at, or any corneal thinning which you could see in viral keratitis. It is useful for following up your ectasias, and most of the time the reliability of your readings when you're doing serial follow-ups is very good with an anterior segment OCT. You can image them in high drops when you would like to look at the intrastromal clefts of fluid collection, in corneal edemas where you look for Descemet membranes detachments, and in endothelial decompensations, commonly Fuchs endothelial corneal dystrophies here, when you are imaging them early on and you would like to look at their pachymetry and see how it behaves during the course of follow-up. When you want to pick up early rejections especially in lamellar surgeries and DAL, D6 and DMEX here, in preoperative planning of lamellar surgeries, both endothelial and anterior lamellar surgeries. In postoperative follow-up of these lenticule sizes, their edema, how the edema is going out, how is it settling, the presence or absence of double chambers in the event there is an edema, and the presence of Descemet's membrane, and how the Descemet's membrane detachment behaves following bubbling procedures, and of course in DMEC as well. And of course, the one of the most important is the planning and refractive surgeries and therapeutic surface ablations here. We'll take them up one by one. Here you have a corneal edema. You have a significant, the edema here is when you image it on an anterior segment OCT, you can profile the kind of detachment which you can see. It could be a bullous detachment, a total detachment, or scroll detachments. So based on knowing this, you could go ahead and plan the type of intervention you would like to have in these patients here. When you're looking at the ASOCT to help you in ectasia diagnosis and ectasia follow-ups, this is pretty much the diagnostic criteria where you look at the pachymetry features within the 5 millimeter zone of the corneal ectasia, and you will look at the superior supranasal infratemporal disparity, the superior inferior disparity, the minimal thickness, the maximal and the minimal maximal difference here. So normal parameters, when these parameters, the supranasal infratemporal is lesser than 45, is normal. Again, the superior and inferior difference is usually lesser than 45. The minimal thickness is above 470 microns, commonly in normal, and the minimum and maximum difference should be around 100 microns here. So when these parameters are not conformed to, then you have the suspicion of ectasia when you're looking at them in pachymetry. This is one picture here where you're able to see a largely ectatic area, and your diagnosis of keratoconus is quite obvious on this here. When you're following up patients of keratoconus, anterior segment OCT now uses epithelial thickness mapping to evaluate and delineate early ectasia, especially when you're looking at those eyes with ocular allergy, and to see where the ectasia is going to be developing. You will find early evidences of epithelial thinning in these regions here. When you're looking at corneal high drops, which develops in ectasias, both in keratoconus and pellucid marginal degenerations, it helps you to delineate the intrastromal fluid clefts here, and it helps to delineate how these behave once you are bubbling these. You take them for intracameral gas injections or air injections. When you see Descemet's membrane detachments post-surgical cornea, several times the slit lamp evaluation is not good enough to pick up because of the haziness, and an anterior segment OCT helps you to pick up these bullous Descemet detachments, and the intraoperative OCTs helps you to plan on the quadrant of an entry, the kind of bubbling, and see if it gets settled following your intervention here. One other factor, one other place where in cornea practice, anterior segment OCT is playing a very useful role is in the area of scleral contact lens fittings for advanced corneal ectasias here. And as we are fitting more and more of our patients who are of ectasia who are cross-linked with contact lenses, rose case and scleral contact lenses, anterior segment OCT of what is known as the tear film vault here. Again, this is another vault which we have. The vault is, this picks up the fluid level or the tear fluid between the cornea and the contact lens which is fitted in, and assessing these tear film vaults, the lens vault or the contact lens vault in these cases helps us to decide and on the optimal scleral contact lenses which need to be worn for these advanced ectasias here. Another area in refractive surgery where you look at pachymetry estimations, not just the corneal thickness in toto, but you also look at the epithelial thickness in these cases. And these are useful when you're planning neutral TCATs, that is topo-guided custom ablation treatments, especially when you're taking them on for post-PK astigmatisms. These ASOCTs really help you to decide on the amount of epithelial thickness which needs to be ablated before you take them for the neutral TCAT treatment here. Another important evaluation is the anterior chamber depth, the endo ACDs, which you would want to calculate for implanting phakic ICLs here. And in postoperative phase of phakic ICLs, you would want to calculate the ICL lens vault, meaning the distance between the anterior capsule of the lens and the posterior surface of the phakic IOL. And we would want to know if the lens vault is optimal in these cases. Higher walls and lower walls will have to be watched for and dealt with accordingly to to what you would feel optimal in these cases. Another option in refractive surgeries is in implantation of intracorneal ring segments, and you could look at the depth at which these segments have been implanted and postoperative follow-up to see the corneal stromal decompensation around these stroma ICRS segments will also be helpful here. Angle evaluations again can be best done with ASOCT, especially after you've done ICLs for these patients here, and these would help you to document the angle narrowing in such cases as well here. One other important factor which ASOCT is really useful in post-refractive surgery scenarios when you're looking at interface problems and you're looking at the epithelial ingrowths in these patients, most of the time you would be able to pick them up on your slit lamp evaluation as well. But this is something which is very important when you find pressure-induced stromal keratitis is something which is very well documented on an ASOCT. You would find that subtle space between the LASIK flap and the rest of the residual stroma here, which only improves when you're managing the pressures in this particular eyes. Moving on to the ocular surface here, for tear film evaluations, it is a very useful imaging modality. And the recent ones also help you to, the advanced ones help you to image meibomian gland, but it's not much into commercial use these days here. The corneal thickness, epithelial thickness is another important factor when you were looking at limbal stem cell deficiency patients here. ASOCT in OSSN has been well described, wonderful papers by Dr. Carol Karp and her team here. When you have a hyperreflective thickened epithelial layer, which can be well delineated on your ASOCTs, there will be an abrupt transition from the normal epithelium into the abnormal epithelium in these cases, and you will be able to see a distinct plane of the anomalous malignant tissue as compared to the normal tissue lying behind. There would be variants on these which you need to look at, and again, malignant melanomas can also have characteristic appearances which can be seen on ASOCT here. Another aspect where you would really want to look at is the corneal degenerations, the level at which these degenerations are placed on the corneal stroma and the subepithelium and the epithelium. And these can be very beautifully imaged as you're seeing in a BSK in this particular patient here. One other important use is in differentiating adenoviral keratoconjunctivitis and microsporidiasis, which is commonly a difficulty, especially for those beginners and for students here. You will find the level of adenoviral lesions are much subepithelial, whereas you would find most of your microsporidial is more superficial out here. So that's how the anterior segment OCT helps you to differentiate a microsporidial adenoviral for those who feel they look very similar. An important application of ASOCT in adults is in severe corneoiridic scars, where you're not able to image the amount of damage which has been done to the anterior segment and the lens. These can be picked up, but in dense corneoiridic scars, ASOCTs don't image best, and you probably will have to look at uveums in these patients here. And these are pediatric cases where you can look at you do a uveum beforehand, and you get your cross-sectional imaging to decide on the kind of intervention, the entry points when you need to do pediatric keratoplasties here. When you look at post-PK patients, looking at your graft profiles is something which is really helpful in imaging in these graft profiles. If you're planning regrafts them, depending on the size and your graft profiles, the inner edges, especially if you're planning endothelial surgery or DSEC following post-PKs, these imaging comes in very useful. Again, anterior segment OCT is one of the most important tools when you're looking at planning in terms of anterior lamellar surgeries, endothelial surgeries in dystrophies. This is one particular patient here who's already undergone ALTK by me. You could see the graft interface here, but it's got a recurrence here, which is there in the subepithelial region of this particular patient here. This is the other eye when he presented much later here, and you could see the level or the depth of involvement, which helps you to plan on the size of the microkeratome head, which you would need to do for your ALT case for particular patients here. So those are more magnified views. When you're looking at endothelial, the host cornea here, and this is the slit lamp mounted Zeiss OCT, and this is the OptoView, which is the Fourier domain OCT imaging here. Another important fact when you have to remember when you're doing these lamellar grafts, ASOCTs are important in serial follow-ups in helping you to pick up endothelial rejections and stromal rejections in cases of DALS. And if you miss out on your ASOCTs, you probably can miss out these rejections, which are reversible when they are picked up earlier on. These are examples of a patient of mine of FECD who underwent serial ASOCT scans following a DSEK procedure. It also helps to see how your endothelial lenticule is coming back from its edema and how it gets back and gets attached, and the thickness of the lenticule will all help you in the follow-up here. This is to image the epithelial involvement in an FECD. It shows how from an asymptomatic stage, as the patient got severe, she went on into a bullous keratopathy before she agreed to go in for a DSEK procedure here. Another important role is in identifying post-DAL dissections. These could be very subtle in the earlier cases, and when missed, they come back 3 months later, you would have a near hazy or opaque graft from your hands. So that help you to pick up when you look at the thickness of the stroma in cases of your DALs and compare them on serial follow-ups, you will be able to pick up your early stromal rejections as well here. In post-DALK, immediate post-op patients, especially those if they had perforations, this is one such patient in which the brave slash landed up in a perforation, but I was able to go ahead and finish the DALK here. And here you don't see so much of a double chamber here, but this is one other patient done by my resident whom I had assisted when she had ruptured during removal of the residual stroma bed here. And beyond day 5, when the edema was not resolving, when you go ahead and do an imaging, it helps you to pick up double chambers in the anterior and helps you to decide and take them in for a rebubbling in these patients. So I think I would stop here, and we could probably take on questions later on if we have time. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for the excellent talk and a great presentation. Over to Dr. Revati, ma'am.
Yeah, the next 2 topics are about topography. And the first speaker will be Dr. Manoranjan Das, who is a senior corneal surgeon in Madurai Aravind Eye Hospital, a very prolific surgeon and well known. And he is going to talk about the placido disc based topography. Over to you, Mano.
Good afternoon, madam. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
And thank you, ma'am, for giving me opportunity. So today my topic given to me is placido disc corneal topography. But because all of us we know that this is the beginning of the topography system. So nowadays we are not using solo topography system based on placido disc. So it has improved over these years from manual keratometer to simple placido disc system to again the computerized video keratography systems, and then of course to slit scan system complementing with the film systems. So today I will just cover the basics of the topography by the placido disc, and then we'll go to cover the OBSCAN 2 system, where there is a combination of both the placido disc system and also the slit scan imaging systems. So why do we need these curvature maps, or why do we need to be so much worried about the corneal curvature? So this is basically done to assess the view disorders, commonly disorders like corneal refractive disorders, to plan for refractive surgery and see the follow-up, to assess contact lens fittings, or to go for the irregular corneal assessment and their progression in subsequent follow-up. So the main principle on basis of which this topographers have been made is the curvature based or in the elevation based concept. So curvature-based concepts is with the Placido disc and the slit scanning system and the Simpson systems also come on the basis of elevation maps. The Placido disc topography was well discovered in 1880 and it is consisting of a disc with concentric dark and light rings in a center of a convex lens which visualizes and reflects the reflection and the reflections is collected in form of a data. The principle is that it uses the reflection principle and studies the first Purkinje image from the cornea resulting from the reflection of the illuminated wires to the of the projection device to the processing computer nearby. So various data which are obtained from the computers can be listed like numeric power plots or keratometric view, photokeratoscopic view, profile view, and colored maps. These are the numerous data which are collected as soon as these reflections are reflected from the tear film. So this data, so it the numeric power, and this is this is derived from the 10 concentric circular zones with 1 millimeter of interval in between in a radial fashion. So like this, it will be like this. Whatever you say, it will be mapped in this way. So next is the keratometric view. The keratometric view usually depicts the keratometric readings along the two principal meridians, that is K1 and K2, at different zones of 3 millimeter or 5 millimeter or the peripheral 7 millimeter zones. Then photokeratoscopic view, this is how the regular Meyer, normal Meyer looks like. So if it is normal, then it will be quiz-spaced. And when it is has got astigmatic cornea, then you can see this type of oblate appearance. And when there is a asphericity seen, then you can see the crowding of the Meyers, and there is no equal spacing between the Meyers. So this is the another image showing the crowding of Meyers in the inferior temporal part of the cornea. The profile view also shows the graphical plotting of the stiffest and the flattest meridian and along the x and y axis. So next, the color-coded maps. The color-coded maps can be classified as the hot colors with a red and the variation of the red colors, and the cool colors, blue and variants, and to show the flat portions of the cornea, unlike the red one which shows the stiff portion of the cornea. So then it can be same map which is derived from this system can be plotted in absolute scale and also in the relative scale. Why is this too important? Because the absolute scale, we can preset the color to the same color for all types of maps, whereas in the other mode, we can have different color modes for the different map. So absolute scale, the minimum and the maximum is assigned as the same colors, whereas the normalized scale, you get the actual and minimal maximal keratometric diopter value of a particular cornea. So in absolute scale, the larger increment steps of 0.5 to 1.5 diopters can be used, and this might miss the subtle change. So for all practical purpose or detailed description, if you need, and then you have to normalize scale of extraction. So these are the indices which has to be seen with respect to the corneal abnormalities. And first one will be the CMK values. So major axis of CMK is that which is has got a greatest power, and the which is 90 degrees opposite to it.
Excuse me, sir.
So surface
The
symmetry index.
participants have not unmuted the audio.
Hello.
Are
Is there an echo there?
Thank you.
So participant have to close the on, yeah. So the surface asymmetric index SAI is a difference between the corneal power along the central 180 degrees. So the upper half and the lower half has to be compared to see the difference. So surface irregularity index is also calculated from the local fluctuation along the 256 equally spaced meridians along the 10 central Myers. And this measures the regularity of the cornea at the central 4.5 millimeter area. It can be, SRI can be in only normal. When it is normal, say, that means it should be always less than 0.56. If unless otherwise it is perfectly regular cornea where the value shows 0. So anything less than 0.56 SRI is considered to be normal cornea. So the other qualitative index which shows the keratoconus is mainly by KISA index or by KPI or keratoconus prediction index or cone location magnitude index CLMI. So these are the few indices for keratoconus confirmation or keratoconus diagnosis. So this is the map which is showing the inferior stiffening and you can see in the asymmetric bow type like picture which is taken in the opticon. And you can see the variation in the inferior cornea alone. So this is also the stiff cornea showing us is almost like symmetric bow tie, but this might be only the symmetric as a symmetric bow tie with a stiff cornea. It may not be the keratoconus. So we have to get the other findings correlation with this to label it as a keratoconus. So this is other map with this opticon which has which is showing you the against the rule astigmatism horizontal axis crab claw pattern is seen, which is a diagnostic of the PMD. So whatever said and done, this type of placido disc alone systems have got many limitations as that they do not measure the central zone. The quality of tear films matters and the data which is extrapolated from this doesn't hold good for irregular surfaces of cornea, and there can be inter and intra observational variant. So next, coming to the off scan to tide over this limitations of this placido disc system. So off scan system has come which integrates the slit scan system along with the placido disc. So here you get about the 3D slit scan topography machine where both the parameters are included, and now you get to have some 40 images taken from left to right and right to left taken in 1.5 seconds, and it can be correlated with the best fitting sphere. So if you see here, the pink color code is supposed to be the best fit, and according to this, whatever which goes, whatever corneal parameters extrapolated here, which goes above is the elevation, and whatever goes below is the depression. So then you will see the color coding. So elevation map is usually represented in different steps. The surface which is congruent to the west sphere is usually green color, and which is under is always blue color, and which is above is in the shades of red and orange. So this is the pictorial representation of a nice this off scan. You can see once this scan is given to you, you have to see various. So first is this ratio of the radii of curvature anterior BFS versus posterior BFS should be less than 1.21. Here it is. So this ratio versus this ratio 6.5 should be less than 1.21. Similarly, posterior BFS it should be less than 55 diopters. So this is here. So it should be less than this. Go to next. This quad map you can see, and this is almost a normal scan, but and this is similarly this is a anterior BFS showing the normal scan versus the abnormal, and this is the posterior BFS showing the normal versus the abnormal. You can see posterior stiffness of the map, and this characteristic map is also you can see the normal, abnormal maps which has got increased K readings, and the color code shows the warm colors or aggressive colors. So pachymetry map also, you can see this map with the center is green color, and periphery, as it comes to the periphery, it is almost like cool colors. It depends on the thickness. So the measurement of the thickness is always from the tear film to the Descemet's membrane. So that is how it calculates about 20 to 30 microns extra than the ultrasonography. So here it just says that it's a thin cornea at the center with respect to the periphery. So this is the normal parameters which it should be seen to assess the parameter. We should remember to read a off scan. The off scan, it is posterior SIM case, then inferior superior asymmetry at 3 millimeter zone, 5 millimeter zone, thinness pachy, mean power, everything is here. So next we'll see the examples. So you can see the ratio here is less than 1.25, 1.21. Next is the posterior BFS less than 55 and no elevations. Next is the SIM case value which is written there 45. The 3 millimeter zone SI ratio is less than 1.5. At 2 millimeter, at 5 millimeter zone, the ratio is less than 2 diopters. And the thinness pachy is here 574. The pachy difference between the center and the 7 millimeter is less than 100. And then there is absence of any asymmetric bow tie. So similarly, the second examples, you can see the abnormality. Here you can see all the abnormality as we are going ahead with the step by step. These ratios has to be always remembered in sequence so that you can come to a conclusion in diagnosing this disease. So similarly, you can see the thin cornea. This is not a abnormal cornea other than thinness. So this is how you can see thinness pachy, and the K mass 3 millimeter, 5 millimeter zones as a normal, and here also PBFS is normal. So this is a TMD case, which again you see all the parameters abnormal here with a crab claw appearance. So this is a case of keratoglobus. We can see the thinness and the warm colors all throughout, from limbus to limbus, irrespective of 3, 5, or 12 millimeter zone, with stiff case and the thinnest posterior float, high posterior float or high anterior floats. So this is a case of post-classic ectasia. You can see the central thinning and the warm colors here, along with the ectasia and the inferior temporal quadrant. So after this is another map showing the post-RK, where you can see the flattening of the curvature and the center here, and also the flattening is greatest at the center. You can, and also the thinness of the pachy you can see. The limitations of off scans also are there. It's not that it will be, it is totally normal for all cases. So for that limitation to tide over, the next systems have already come. So probably the next talk, Vinay Pillai will talk about the Pentacam system to tide over the limitations of this off scan system. But off scan, on the absence of progression map for keratoconus or ectatic disorders, I feel is the clinically more relevant thing which we should take in notice for clinical practice when you think that that clinically progression. So then case which you have already done regular or repeated OB scan, so you should go for a pentacam to see the progression. And always we need to compare maps to map. We cannot compare a map from TOMI or Opticon along with the OB scan, or OB scan along with the map for pentacam. So pentacam has to be compared with pentacam, OB-scan has to be compared with OB-scan, and so every system has got its own reading and own limitations. It cannot be superimposed with one another. That is what is a clinical tips which we should all remember. So there are few questions which can be asked, like to the students, like principle of OB-scan, and then next can be what is contact lens Warpage, and then third can be what is Q value, then next can be the topography finding use keratoconus, and then next what are the criteria called Revino's criteria, and then you can have a similar question like how do you diagnose a case of Pomfrey keratoconus, and or what is Pomfrey keratoconus, then what is a rasterostereography, and next will be like topography findings of PMD. There are the few questions which they should remember as such, and these are the maps which they will be given for the practical exam. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Manoranjan. Now we'll move on to Dr. Vinay Pillai's talk on Scheimpflug-based topography. And Dr. Vinay is trained in Shankara Nethralaya, and now at present, and he's one of the team members of Dr. Sita Lakshmi's ocular surface team. And now at present, he is based in Cochin in Giridhar Institute. And now he's going to talk on the topography based on Scheimpflug's.
Thank you, madam. Hope I'm audible and my screen is.
Yes.
Thank you for having me here. It's been, great to see all of you again. So a lot of talk has been made by Dr. Das's talk of lots of different.
Participants, kindly mute your audios, please.
Probably one option which can be done is the host can mute everybody's audio. That can be done probably. Right. So of various techniques have been used to measure the cornea, and what I'm dealing with is the Scheimpflug today. So when you measure cornea, what are the things assessed? One is the radius of the curvature, the power, and the height. And both the radius and the curvature and the power can be measured using what is Placido-based. The Scheimpflug and other things, the difference from the Placido-based system is the measurement of the height. Now, this is what Scheimpflug principle stands for, and I have practically no clue what it means. The only thing that I understood or understand is that this is a normal camera where you have the object, the image, and the plane of the lens parallel to each other. And when the lens is tilted and the object and the image plane are tilted, this principle helps in assessing or getting an image with very good depth. To read it. The first step in any of these, topography printout is to see which machine the printout is from, whether you're familiar if you see in the red, which means it is not good at all, and see the same patient's printout with good quality. That's just 1 second difference. That's just a blink that has made the whole difference. So these are the first things to look. And now once you're sure that the image is good, captured image is good, everything is good, that you're ready to read, then you go into the print. So in most of the cases, what we look first is at this one, the curvature map. What exactly curvature stands for, everything has been described by Dr. Das, so I won't go into that. But then this is the first picture that we see. So when you see a picture like this, what are the things that you look at? See whether this cornea is symmetrical. What did I mean by symmetry? Whether the upper half and the lower half are same, or is it comparable? In this picture, if you see, this is the horizontal, this is the flat meridian. Actually, what we have to understand in most of the tomographers, what the machine measures is the flat meridian, which is given here, K1. The K2, which is a steep meridian, is actually the K value of the meridian, which is 90 degrees to that, and it is not the steepest meridian. It may not be the steepest meridian in the cornea. You may find other points which are steeper than this. So on either side of this flat meridian is the cornea. Does it look same? That is a first step to assess. Then you look at the steepness, how steep the cornea is, what is the axis, what is the astigmatism, all those things are there. This is the first step to assess. Then what is the normal in these cases? There is something called as enantiomorphism, which basically means that the picture in one cornea is like the mirror image in other. This is actually a TMS, which is a Placido-based systems image. And if you see in this one, the flat meridian is at 9.
Voice, please.
Sorry?
Please, voice. We're not getting any voice.
Oh. One second, I'm not sure why. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So the mirror image. This is the right eye and this is the left eye. If you see, this is actually the mirror image of this. So that is what is seen in a normal cornea, and this is another one showing the same, feature. Now, when you take the topography of a normal cornea, it is supposed the asymmetrical bow tie is supposed to be the most common, and this has been done based on the Placido system. So this is again Placido-based TMS printout, a round oval pattern. Then this is a oculizer or the pentacam printout showing the symmetrical bow tie. Above and below the flat meridian, it is a very symmetrical 8 picture. Symmetrical bow tie. Then if you see here, there is a slight, larger, the upper part of the 8 is slightly larger than the lower one, which means that there is a superior steepening. This is considered to be, clinically significant if the value somewhere here around the 5 millimeter circle is about 2.5 more than the lower one. Then probably it might indicate an abnormal cornea. Similarly, this is another cornea which shows a steepening in the inferior aspect. If you see here, the 5 millimeter area, the steeper one is 41.5 and the lower part is 43.5. Inferior steepening, anything more than 1.5 should always raise your antenna about suspecting that there is something going on in the cornea. Now, once we know this, is it is this cornea normal or abnormal? Well, the other print or other values will help you in arriving at that, which we'll come to later. Irregular astigmatism gives you a very bizarre pattern like in this and this. Both of them are post-transplant corneas. And this is, as has been described before by Dr. Das, as a classic Kraptov pattern in PMD. Now, once you're through your curvature map, next you go on to the curvature or thickness map. So, along with this map, these these numbers have also to be looked into. It gives the center of the pupil, the apex, and the thinnest local. Very important point is the thinnest local, which will help us in knowing what is the thinnest point in the cornea. And one other small factor which might help you is this xy. What it means is how much is the one point dislocated from the center, geometrical center, that is the back apex of the cornea. If this y, that is the vertical displacement of the thinnest point, is more than 0.5, then probably that is one small pointer helping noting an abnormality. So that is the second aspect to look at. Third is what is quite significant in these tomographic maps is the elevation map. So what does it mean? What does elevation mean? Elevation means how much one point is elevated or is separated from the reference surface. And it has again been described by Dr. Das in detail. So cornea is this yellow one. Cornea is not spherical. You have the center part which is steeper and the peripheral part which is flatter. Taking those values into consideration of one particular surface, the computer calculates a sphere which actually fits best into this. That which in very simplistic terms mean that a sphere which will have maximum contact with that surface if it is put into that surface. So these contact areas are the green areas, and this is a normal elevation. This is of the anterior surface and this is of the posterior surface. And this is probably an abnormal surface. Why abnormal? One, because there is too much of so-called tongue-state extension or protrusion into the corneal center. And then if you see very clearly, this is a kind of localized area of higher elevation compared to surrounding area, which is more pronounced in the posterior part. And this is called as isolated islands. And these are very important, and these are signs of probably abnormal cornea again. Now, let us consider this map. If you see the way we go, curvature map, reasonably okay. Steeper is horizontal, but that is okay against the rule astigmatism, but very reasonably, normal case. Axis cylinder, hardly one diopter cylinder. Then look at the thickness. Okay, thickness actually slightly on the thicker side, but everything is okay. Thinness local, less than 0.5. Now, is this normal? And that is where the importance of elevation comes in. If you see the anterior elevation, it will be okay. But look at the posterior elevation. What we see is a very localized elevation and more than 20 microns above the reference. And that is significant value in pentacam or oculizer. For posterior elevation more than 20 or anterior elevation more than 15 in the central 5 millimeter zone may likely be pathologic, especially showing a kind of early ectasia. So this is the advantage of elevation map. Now take this map. What do we see here? The classic crab claw pattern. So what is our first diagnosis? It is always pellucid. But look at the rest of the cornea. What do we see? There is a central thin area. The rest of the cornea is okay in terms of cornea, and also the elevation is very localized. Now, if one other point here is that if you see the thinnest point, that is where it is denoted by this small circle, the thinnest point, the maximum elevation, anterior and posterior, all coincide into one point, and that is very classic of ectasia, and this actually is a keratoconus and not PMD. So that is the importance of corneal thickness map. If it is PMD, as in this case, you can see that the corneal thickness in the center part is normal. The lower part, the white means it is not imaged, or the machine is not able to capture those. And this is the case, extreme thinning with severe bowing, superiority. So next, this till now is what you get in almost all, tomography machines. Now, bad or Bellin-Ambroso display or Bellin-Ambroso enhanced ectasia is a feature very specific to pentacam or oculizer. Now, this is the bad display. It helps you to detect the cone easily. Now, how it does it? Little, difficult to comprehend, but then this is the normal cornea with where the sphere touches everywhere. And this is an abnormal cornea, keratoconus cornea, where the calculated best fit sphere. If you see, the height of the cone here is only this much. The idea of BAT display is to enhance this cone display. And what they have done is, in calculating the best fit sphere, they have removed this zone. That is, 4 millimeter zone from the thinnest point is removed from calculating the best fit sphere. So the sphere is calculated for this area, and this is how it fits, and your cone gets exaggerated. And this is the output. This is the normal best fit sphere, and this is the enhanced best fit sphere. If you see both the localized islands, the value is more, it is more enhanced, and this is the difference between these two. And what the green means is normal, doubtful, and it's definitely abnormal. It's the one standard deviation from the normal, 2 standard deviations away from the normal. That is what these yellow and red means. And that is the advantage of Pentacam. You don't have to actually by heart the numbers. It's all flat. Now this is another important printout or factor which helps you in diagnosing the abnormal cornea. The spatial thickness profile means how the corneal, thickness is changing from the thinnest point to the periphery. So this is 500, and it goes. What these two outer lines means, it is 95, within the 95 percentile of the normal. So this is the red line is the normal, the cornea of the patient. If this red line doesn't follow the shape of this line or goes out of it, then it is abnormal. And percentage thickness increases how fast the thickness increases from the thinnest point. So again, the same principle here. If it goes out or is not following the line, it is abnormal, which is clearly shown here. Now this is the cornea which we patient. Again, if you take the sagittal curvature, it is normal, thickness is normal, anterior curvature is normal, posterior curvature, there is an isolated island, but then if you look at the absolute value, it is within the normal. Anything less than 20 probably is normal. Above 20 is absolutely abnormal. It is considered as. So do we take this as normal or not? That is where the BAT display helps us. Okay, if you see the posterior curvature, posterior elevation here, it is significantly elevated, and the difference is very significant. So it is an abnormal cornea, and if you see this, spatial thickness also slightly out of the normal. So is this, a real keratoconic cornea? The answer is probably yes, probably no. We don't know, but definitely this is not a patient for laser vision correction. That is where these BAT printout helps us. Now look at this cornea. Curvature very symmetrical, not steep cornea, but then thickness quite thin. Thickness is both anterior and posterior elevation normal. So is this abnormal? Is this a keratoconus? Up to the next one, the BAT printout is absolutely normal. Now these are another set of statistical indices which they have come out with, the D's. Again, you don't have to by heart the numbers. If it is flagged yellow, it just means it is 1 standard deviation away from the majority, and then yellow when red is 2 standard deviation. But in this case, it is practically everything is normal. So most likely this cornea is a normal cornea, but thin Pachy. Again, not a candidate for refractive surgery because of the thinner cornea. So this printout, if you see, it is not symmetrical. There is inferior steepening. This is a topo which I showed before. Look at the values, almost 2 diopters inferior steepening. So is this abnormal? Is this early keratoconus? Pachy map is normal, thinness is normal. Slightly, it is decentered more than what we would like it to be. Elevations are normal, plus 16, but small island here, still probably not in the abnormal range. Elevation, though there is a posterior, in enhanced, it's showing a posterior significant elevation, elevation or isolated island, it is not significant. Again, the D is in yellow, but then rest of all the parameters are normal. Probably this is a normal cornea. Again, can you do a refractive surgery? Probably yes, you can. Here comes the importance of the other eye of the same patient. What is the situation? It's a frank keratoconus, steep cornea, skewing, thin cornea, high posterior elevation, everything abnormal. So never take a decision based on top of one eye. Always see what the situation the other eye is. Now this is the major factors which we shown in all. These are the major topo prints which we see. Then there are specialized things which in each machine. There are difference map which shows the helps you in differentiating what has been the effect of treatment. For example, this is a post myopic astigmatism, pre and post, and shows kind of flattening post treatment, and also the central flattening, which means that the ablation has been very centered. This is a patient who has undergone a topo-guided PRK with cross-linking, post and pre pictures, and the difference showing steepening in the superior part and flattening in the center part. DLK, pre-suture removal and post-suture removal, showing kind of flattening in areas so that the irregularity reduces. Now this is what the raw image, the machine captures, the Scheimpflug image. Times where we don't have or we don't have access to anterior segment OCT, this might come in handy. So this is the picture. This is how the machine captures image. Takes multiple images. The one, there is a camera at the center which is for focus, and the second camera rotates 180 degree from temple to nasal side and catches various cross sections, and from this the data is captured. So this is the raw image, and this is an interesting output called as densitometry. What it gives is how much is the reflected in each part, and this is the air, and this is the normal cornea, which is somewhere around 20. This is a hypercage image from the lens, I believe, and this is the lens. So these can be used in clinic. This is, many of us would have had corneas like this after CT. So this is the preoperative picture, which shows the value of around 40. Then this is 1 week post-op. Dense haze has shot up to 100. 3 months still in that level. By 10 months, it has started to fall somewhere around 69, and then by 2 years, it has practically normalized to what it was. That is one use. Then again, look at the dilated lens. This is, compare it with this one. This is an early cataract. Actually, it is not helpful to diagnose, but you can use this to show it to your patients. So there is a real cataract in this. Now this is a keratoconus which has all features: scarring, Vogt striae, Leischer's ring. This is a Scheimpflug image. This is the area of interest which is shown here. Normal cornea, that is a clear cornea, is somewhere around 90, and this area, that is a empty air, is somewhere around 3.3. Now, as we mentioned, as we bring this zone of interest to the area of scarring, it shoots up to 38. As the scarring increases, the number also shoots up. So, and magnified view, you can actually measure this actually is a scar, and if you see, this is a epithelial hypertrophy. The thin area you can have epithelial hypertrophy here. So the actual thickness can be roughly measured here, not very clear. It's a little bit more if you inverse the picture. But then the best option is OCT in these cases. I'm not sure whether this is clear for you. This is actually post-ICL where you have measured the volt here. This is again, playing with the image, inverting and playing with the contrast. This is the anterior surface of the lens and this is the posterior surface of the ICL. And in addition to this, there are a lot of other, printouts or options in these machines. Wernicke, Fourier analysis, lots of things which may help you in very different situations. But then generally in all these cases, in most of the tomographers and topographers, what we use is a quad map printout, which gives you the curvature, Packley map, the lesions, which in most of the cases is sufficient to make a diagnosis and decide on how the cornea is. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for the excellent presentation. You have explained it in very simple words. It must be useful for the PGs to hear. Thank you, sir. And we can have questions. So, a question on whether corneal Pachy, which one is good, which is compared to all other pachymetry, which is the gold standard. We have answered ultrasound. And can we do a PRK in a keratoglobus cornea if Pachy is good?
So answering to the question, I think for the PRK in keratoglobus, there's absolutely not doing. And next is that Pachy in the irregular corneas. I think Pachy in irregular corneas will be more appropriate if you got anterior segment aestheticity. And third question, if you had to see for the posterior float in aestheticity, no, that is also no. So please, Revati Madam, you can tell some Vinay.
The float is not there in ASOCT, but there are machines which with OCT principle where you can assess the anterior and posterior curvature. Like Visande Omni uses OCT principle to measure the anterior and posterior curvature. Routine standalone ASOCT, I don't think it is possible. It's just a software manipulation which can be done.
And is the confocal helpful in the follow-up of keratoconus patients post CXL? Ma'am, to Dr. Anita, ma'am. The question is whether confocal is helpful in follow-up of KC patients post CXL.
Confocal, basically in keratoconus, what you find is that in the anterior stroma, there'll be a loss of keratocytes. That is what you normally see. And beyond that, I think as far as the C3R is concerned, I don't have any information. But basically, you can see that the keratocytes are thin, and you can also see the epithelial thinning.
I think the questionnaire probably mean the demarcation line or something like that, whether that can be seen in the confocal or the changes in the confocal due to the cross-linking. But I don't think confocal, logically, I don't have any offhand information. Logically, that is not the right platform to assess this, because this is a very small area we are assessing. It's better to go for something like an ASOCT or a topography where a large area can be studied, and that can give a better idea in following up these patients than looking for a very small area.
I think so, madam. And in addition, it can be used to assess the cellular changes in the cornea after CXL, rather than assessing the progression and stuff like that.
Maybe in the immediate period to just maybe for academic interest. I don't think for a practical way like it's going to be useful. And about the Dr. P.L. Rao's question about the various platforms, which is better for Pachy. I think nowadays they are recognizing ASOCT as a better way to assess Pachy, and some of the laser platforms, they want to include ASOCT into the laser planning and the treatment delivery and all. So maybe in future, because in all these, both optical as well as ultrasonic, the problem there are problems. Both are not very very clear, and especially in irregular or scarred corneas, there will be wrong values will come and it can confuse us. So ASOCT, they are concentrating more, and they want to include in the laser platforms nowadays. Many of the companies, they are trying to do that.
I have a question, ma'am. Will the treatment change, or we can monitor the prognosis of a viral keratitis with confocal microscopy? Is it possible? Like, based on the nerve.
You can see is you can basically indirect information. You're talking about progression or just diagnosis?
Progression.
And
Progression.
treatment, like prognosis of after the treatment, ma'am. Want to know whether after with the
What
viral
you
keratitis.
can establish is that you have the loss of the subbasal nerve plexus, and you can as the nerve fibers regenerate, that you can perhaps study in viral keratitis.
Is there any other advantage of confocal over specular in cases of Fuchs endothelial dystrophies or corneal edema patients, so that like we are not able to do specular in most of these patients with corneal edema? So will it be useful in those cases, confocal?
I think even in confocal also, if it is edematous significantly, the picture will not be very useful to assess. So
You
once
miss a lot,
see,
actually.
once your cornea become edematous, that shows the endothelial cells are not functioning. What you are going to see in all these modalities only the anatomical part, not the functional part of the cells. So when the edema is there, that shows functionally it is. So I don't think you need more than that to, you are going to get further information by looking at a microscope, I mean anatomical structure of these cells. I hope I am clear.
From Meena Lakshmipati,
You'll
was
find the
there
transformation.
possibility of coexisting acanthamoeba and fungal on confocal or culture?
Hello.
No, this acanthamoeba and fungal, which is better, confocal or culture?
It depends on how you. The main thing about culture is it takes around 5 to 10 days for you to get a culture positive. For an early diagnosis, the confocal gives it to you immediately. Acanthamoeba, and you have a smear negative. You go to the confocal to confirm.
Just mute the mic.
Yeah, that's what, like they are complementary, and confocal, the greatest advantage you see it immediately. Sometimes in combined acanthamoeba, you may not get it in the smear. You may get only fungal filaments, but your clinical suspicion may be more towards AK, and also the confocal will show acanthamoeba cyst. Then you can start the treatment for both. The culture may or may not confirm it later. They are complementary.
And that too, the diagnosis of fungal keratitis based on the branching patterns, the angles given. I feel
Incidence 0 only.
needs a vast experience for the a clinician to diagnose this, like whether it is aspergillus or fusarium or pythium. It is
Yes.
No, I don't think confocal, with confocal we'll be able to differentiate the, I mean, find out the species. I don't think it is possible. It's better to rely on the culture identification through culture.
Species diagnosis, you need fundamentally the best thing is only genomics. You have to do the typing and then see, and even that, no, that the morphological classification based upon disease that is being phased out, and then now you have all based upon a T4, T10, that kind. That is where you're evolving into that. For acanthamoeba.
Fungal speciation using
No, fungal species you cannot do. Fusarium and aspergillus, a lot of work has gone into that, and basically they've been looking at dichotomous branching and also the branching angle. So fusarium is supposed to be around 59, and aspergillus is around 26. Not much of a difference. And then the third thing is basically what else is there? I think you have for pythium it's supposed to be around 90 degrees or 75, 80 degrees, something like that. It's I think what you see on the smears is what you also see on the confocal, in the sense that I don't think that the angle is going to be the same every time. So a lot of work has been done where they measured the angles and they finally decided that it's not possible to do fusarium versus aspergillus, which is the ones that we see most commonly. About anything else, I'm not aware. Curvularia, alternaria and all, but I don't know.
Excuse me, about the depth, as in adenovirus and microsporidium,
any other data, or always it maintains the depth thing?
Sir, your question is not clear. Please repeat.
How you differentiate between the adenoviral keratitis and microsporidial infiltrates into the cornea? You talked about the depth. Anything more specific, or that is the sacrosanct?
I think the question is to Dr. Vanati. She showed in the ASOCT about the depth of the lesion, whether that is the main thing or any other way that we can differentiate. That's what the question
I
is.
think the clinical picture is quite characteristic. In a microsporidial keratitis, it has a stick-on appearance. It is more superficial. It looks like epithelial granules which are elevated in appearance. Whereas if you look at the adenoviral keratoconjunctivitis, here you will find fleeting lesions over the epithelium here. And the subepithelial haze which subsequently appears is deeper to the epithelium. And this is what you would be able to image on an ASOCT. Most of the times it is clinically evident and you should be able to pick up Dr. Saha. So that's more than that, the ASOCT is a corroboratory kind of if you have it, you can look at it. And the clinical evidences of the epithelial inflictions are quite characteristics. It is usually for the beginners or those who are not experienced who will have difficulty in differentiating.
Thanks. Just as a corollary, in that keratoconus could be any newer data when patient is interested in getting the laser done, and I am on the GERD. Any newer data is to help me out?
ASOCT, yeah. In ASOCT is now considered one of the early tools one of the tools which can pick up early changes. The ectatic area will show epithelial thinning. So if you're doing serial epithelial thinning, epithelial thickness mapping on an ASOCT, you would be able to pick up those suspicious areas, especially if you're following up pediatric patients who have associated ocular allergy. The epithelial thinning can be picked up early on your ASOCT maps.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
I came across some interesting thing, ma'am. Like with ASOCT, they've identified the graft orientation of the ultra thin dissect button. Like they are seeing the angle, the morphology, like with the ASOCT. If it is an acute angle, then the stromal side is up. Then obtuse angle, the stromal side is down. What is your experience, ma'am, in this? With
I think you're talking about the intraoperative OCT or the OCT which is integrated on your microscopes here. Most of the times when we are doing dissects now, we are marking the surface in several. We have the S mark or the F mark, which are there. I personally don't look at the orientation on an OCT to find out whether it is in or out. It's more useful in a DMEC where you will see the rolling, the way it is rolled in and rolled out, you'll be able to look at your orientation. So I have no personal experience in using the intraoperative OCT for looking at your ultra thin orientations.
Thank you, ma'am. Last question by Dr. Bhubesh Jain. A progressive PMD with minimum Paki 380 microns in 8 to 9 mm zone. How to go about CXL in such a case, and what about UVA radiation zone in such cases?
Sorry, I didn't catch the question. I'm not able to see it on the chat here.
I think the question is to Dr. Vinay Pillai.
Okay, fine.
Progressive PMD with minimum Paki 380 microns in 3 to 9 mm zone. How to go about CXL in such a case, and what about the UVA irradiation zone in such cases?
Strict protocol wise, this is not fit for C3 or CXL because the Paki is less than 400 microns. This 380 is with the epithelium, and probably you have to subtract another 30-40 microns at least, if not more, from the thinnest point to arrive at your true stromal thickness before you decide. One option is to get an ASOCT done, especially slightly decentered. If it is not a Pentacam or one of those things which gives a 12 millimeter Paki map, the ASOCT, you can just slightly decenter and measure what is the thinnest and then decide. Now, how to do it if the thickness is okay? The exposure zone has to be decentered to include the area of thinning. How large a diameter depends upon the area of thinning in PMD, and probably the normal cornea or the center, if it is not thin, you can protect it with, even a simple paper strip is enough to protect the center of the cornea if it is required. And of course, you have to, it is known that it causes some amount of damage to limbal stem cells. So the limbus has to be protected. So ideal should be, a machine which can give variable aperture diameters. It has to have a large aperture to include from limbus to limbus, and some form of protection to the limbal, palisades.
Any other opinion, ma'am, from Dr. Revati, ma'am?
A case of formifrosty was being followed, but now with the newer technologies, can I be sure it's a formifrosty or it's a normal person? I can do the excimer laser. Because that
I didn't get the question.
previously with whatever data we had,
Hello?
the diagnosis was formifrosted. But now with the newer data, can we be sure whether it's formifrosty or it's a keratoconus or it's a normal? I can go ahead.
In fact, with all the newer, toys, the rate of rejection has increased rather than decreased from, just the Placido-based systems. You can detect a lot more, suspicious based on your elevations and other things. So a suspect, I would never advise any sort of laser vision correction.
So as Kinix it is same. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We have come to the end of this wonderful session now. My sincere thanks to all the faculties for their valuable time for sharing their knowledge and experience. Surely it was a great learning for all of us. My sincere thanks to Dr. Revati ma'am for moderating the session. Thank you for the wonderful participation and great questions from the audiences. We will meet again tomorrow for the next session on retinal imaging. Thank you.